Hello everyone. In this session, we want to talk about IP address options. We refer to the address of the computer or the server or the printer or any node on the network as an IP address. What we're going to look at in this session is how these addresses are configured. We're going to look at two modes of configuration. We're going to look at manually configuring the IP address, and we're going to look at configuring the address using a DHCP server, which is a server that gives out IP addresses automatically. The first one we're going to look at is configuring the IP addresses manually. Now, when we configure an IP address manually, we actually go into the settings of the network card and we type the address of that computer. This option is the easiest approach, and it does not depend on having a DHCP server within your environment. When we are setting up our servers and when we are setting up our printers, we need to give these machines manual IP addresses, or what we call static IP addresses. The reason for that is that we need the address of the server and the printers to be fixed. And when you give a machine a manual IP address, that is a fixed address, if you compare that to a DHCP address from the DHCP server, a DHCP address changes. So therefore, it is not fixed. It depends on the type of machine that we're configuring. If you are configuring client machines on the network, then your best course of action is to use a DHCP server. Because if you have to configure 50 or over machines, then you can imagine the amount of work, time-consuming labor to sit down at each machine and actually type in an IP address. If your network is very small, then it's okay for you to give static or manual IP addresses. The client on the network needs to connect to the servers or the printers, and they want to be able to connect each time. So you want the servers, again, to have a fixed and predictable address, but not so much the client computers on the network. What are the disadvantages of using the static IP address or manual? Well, we talked before when we were looking at the advantages that we would need a fixed address. If we had to do that fixed address for a great number of computers, then there would be a great risk of typing an error. And you might have an incorrect configuration. You might type a 2 instead of a 3. And that might cause a problem on the network. If you have to move your device from one part of the network to another part of the network, you might have to go and reconfigure that static IP address. So you see, if you're going to type static IP addresses, and I use the term interchangeably, static or manual, if you are going to type IP addresses for every single computer on your network, it becomes time consuming and it's an impediment to efficient business operations. Think about this. If you were asked to set up a network and the network had 100 client computers, and you decided to give each client computer a manual IP address, when do you think you will finish setting up those computers? It will take a very long time, and in business, time is money. Let us look at the other mode using a DHCP server. A DHCP server has a pool of IP addresses. And when you configure your computer to get addresses from the DHCP server, then automatically your client computer will receive an IP address from the DHCP server. So this prevents errors, because remember, if you are manually typing in the values at each computer, at some point in time, you're dealing with numbers, you will make an error. You're going to reduce the time that you spend on configuring the computers at work. And remember again, time is money. Also, if you have to move your laptop computer from one location to the other location, it will automatically get reconfigured with the IP address so that you don't have to manually go and type that IP address. What disadvantages do you have when you use DHCP? Well, one thing about DHCP, you need a DHCP server on your network if you have lots of client computers to give out IP addresses. If what we call a rogue DHCP server is introduced into the network, it could bring your network down. How can that happen? Well, someone can come and they can plug in probably a wireless router into your network, and the wireless router gives off DHCP addresses unless you turn off DHCP. You can have a server machine that is not authorized. When that happens, the whole network will go down because the client will not know where to get the DHCP address from. So you have to be careful and make sure that when you're setting up that DHCP server is authorized to give out network addresses on the network. So I would suggest that if you are setting up a large network with lots of client computers, that you make use of DHCP addresses. Again, for setting up your servers and your printers, you need to use the manual typing of IP addresses because you have to give them each a static address. We want now to take a look and see how we configure our network adapter with static or DHCP addresses. Let us take a look at configuring the network card or the network adapter. So we're going to go to the icon, right click on that icon, and click on Open Network and Sharing Center. I have a number of adapters here. The one I'm going to be looking at is the Ethernet adapter. I'm going to click Change Adapter Settings. And I want this one here, Ethernet Contoso.com. So I'm going to right click and then click on Properties. Under the Networking tab, I want to look for the IP version 4. So I'm going to scroll down a bit and then click on Internet Protocol version 4, TCP IP version 4. Click on that, and then I'm going to select Properties. You can see the configuration here, and this configuration is set to give out DHCP addresses from a DHCP server. Let's look at the description. It says, you can get IP settings assigned automatically if your network supports this capability. Otherwise, you need to ask your network administrator for the appropriate IP settings. So if you wanted to do a static configuration, you would have to know the addresses, the subnet mask, the default gateway to type in. So right now we have the DHCP, which is the automatic configuration. Before we look at configuring the static configuration, and before I explain each of these to you, the different options, IP, subnet mask, default gateway, and so on, I want to go and on the command prompt and type ipconfig/all so that you can actually see the settings for this network adapter. So I'm going to click on the command prompt icon here on the taskbar, and I'm going to type ipconfig/all. And that's going to bring up the settings for all my network adapters. So I'm going to scroll up and look for the one that I want, which is the Ethernet adapter. And here it is, Ethernet adapter, DHCP enabled. Yes, because we do have DHCP enabled on the settings. The IP4 address we see here that is being given out by the DHCP server is 192.168.10.101. Above that, you're going to see the IP6 address, which we will get to. And then you have the address of the default gateway, 192.168.10.1. The default gateway is your router address. Then you have the address of your DHCP server. And let's scroll down. Let's see if we find the address of the DNS. Yes? You have the address of the DNS server. So all the settings that the DHCP server will be giving out, we can go to the command prompt and we can type ipconfig/all to actually see the configuration. We're going to close the command prompt. And now we want to do a manual configuration. To do that, we want to click on use the following IP address. So here we're going to plug in an IP address. So we're going to go 192.168.10, and we're going to go 15. And you can press enter there. It says you have entered an address that is missing its subnet mask. Please add a subnet mask. So you see the subnet mask here is added by itself. If we didn't press enter, all we needed to do was to come into the subnet mask box and type a subnet mask. What is a subnet mask? A subnet mask gives you an indication of the class of network you're on. Your network is divided up into different classes. You have a class A network, a class B network, and a class C network. And they all have different settings. For example, this network is a class C network. It means that the first 3 octets, the first 3 parts here, are the network part. And then the 4th octet is where you can configure the hosts or the clients. So whatever IP address you type, then you have to put in the network mask that matches that IP address. And we're actually going to be looking at how we find out what the subnet mask is and how we're able to find out how many hosts we can have on any particular subnet. Right now, let's concentrate on where we put these options. And then you have your default gateway. The default gateway class is the address of your router. So if you know what the address of your router is, you want to plug it in. So we go 192.168, and we're going to go 10 and 1. And then if you know the address of the DNS, if you're an administrator, you will know these things. If you're not, you can ask your network administrator. So we're going to type the address of the DNS, 168, and it's the same. So we're going to type 1. So on your network, your administrator will know these addresses. If you are the administrator, you will have these addresses. You can put 2 DNS servers, your preferred DNS server and your alternate DNS server. So this is how we would configure the adapter for a client machine or for a server that receives a static or manual address. And you want to click on OK. And you want to close the box. Now we're going to close our network connections here. And we're going to close network and sharing. In our next session, we want to look at configuring IP4 or IP6 subnetting. We want to look at the different classes of IP addresses. We want to look and see how we determine what class of IP address we're on. We want to look at how we determine what the subnet mask is. We want to look at how we determine the number of hosts that we can have on a network and how we are actually able to give out these IP addresses for the networks. This is the end of our session, and I want to thank you for listening.